My mother-in-law kicked me out and told me to never come back. Then her lawyer sent me a letter. The sound of Sandra Whitmore's Louboutin heels on hardwood floors still haunts my dreams. Click-clack, click-clack, a rhythm that meant trouble was coming my way. But on that Tuesday morning in March, when I heard those familiar steps approaching the kitchen where I sat with my morning coffee, I had no idea my entire life was about to implode. Ava, we need to talk. I looked up from my laptop, where I'd been reviewing fabric samples for what I thought was our upcoming spring collection. Sandra stood in the doorway of what had been my kitchen for 3 years, her silver hair pulled back in that severe chignon that made her look like she was perpetually disappointed in the world. Which, knowing Sandra, she probably was. "Good morning to you too, Sandra," I said, forcing a smile. "Coffee's fresh if you want some." She didn't move toward the coffee maker. Instead, she stepped into the kitchen, my kitchen, and placed a manila folder on the granite countertop I'd picked out when Daniel and I moved in together. The same countertop where we'd eaten countless breakfasts together, where he'd proposed on my birthday 2 years ago, where I'd cried happy tears when he slipped that emerald-cut diamond on my finger. "This arrangement isn't working," she said, her voice as cold as the January morning when Daniel had left for Dubai. I set down my coffee mug, the one Daniel had brought me from a work trip to Portland, the one with the little cartoon dog that looked like our golden retriever, Max. What arrangement? Sandra's laugh was sharp enough to cut glass. "Don't play naive, dear. It doesn't suit you." She opened the folder and pulled out what looked like legal documents. Daniel asked me to move in temporarily while he was overseas to help with the house and the business. He never mentioned anything about accommodating his girlfriend indefinitely. The word girlfriend dripped from her lips like poison. Not fiancé. Not future daughter-in-law. Girlfriend. As if the ring on my finger was invisible, as if the 3 years I'd spent trying to win over this woman meant nothing. "Sandra, I live here," I said slowly, as if speaking to a child. "This is my home too. Daniel and I." "Daniel isn't here." Her interruption was swift and brutal. "And this house belongs to the Whitmore family. Always has, always will." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "What are you talking about?" "Daniel and I bought this house together. We're on the mortgage together." Sandra's smile was triumphant in a way that made my skin crawl. "Actually, no, you're not." She slid a document across the counter. "The house is in Daniel's name only. Has been since day one. Apparently, your credit wasn't quite good enough for a joint mortgage." The words hit me like a physical blow. I grabbed the document, scanning the names on the deed. Daniel Whitmore. Only Daniel Whitmore. The room started to spin as memories flooded back. Daniel handling all the paperwork, telling me it would be easier if everything went through him first, promising we'd add my name later when we got married. Later. Always later. I put down half the down payment. I whispered, staring at the paper that proved just how naive I'd been. A gift, I'm sure Daniel would say. A contribution to the relationship. Sandra's voice was gentle now, which somehow made it worse. "Look, Ava, I don't dislike you personally. You're a sweet girl. But you're not Whitmore material, and I think deep down you know that." The coffee mug slipped from my fingers and shattered on the tile floor, tiles I'd spent hours picking out at the home improvement store, tiles I'd grouted myself because Daniel was working late again. The brown liquid spread across the white ceramic like a stain I'd never be able to clean up. "Daniel loves me," I said, but even as the words left my mouth, they sounded hollow. "Daniel loves the idea of you," Sandra corrected. "The sweet, accommodating girlfriend who never asks for too much, never rocks the boat." But love and marriage are different things, dear. Marriage is about family, about legacy, about building something that lasts. The Whitmore name means something in this town. I thought about all the times Daniel had deflected when I'd brought up wedding planning. How he'd said we should wait until his career was more stable, until we had more savings, until his mother was more comfortable with the idea. Until. He proposed to me, I said weakly. Men propose to lots of women. It doesn't mean anything until there's a ring on their finger at the altar. Sandra's voice was matter-of-fact, as if she was discussing the weather. And frankly, Ava, I don't see that happening. Not with Daniel. Not with a Whitmore. She reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. I've taken the liberty of finding you a lovely apartment in town. First month's rent is paid. Consider it a going-away gift. The envelope felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds in my hands. You can't just kick me out. This is my home. My life is here. Your life was here, Sandra corrected. But Daniel is gone, and I need to focus on the business without distractions. The company is struggling, Ava. We can't afford to have dead weight right now. Dead weight. The words stung more than they should have, especially since I knew exactly how much work I'd put into Whitmore and Sage over the past 2 years. But Sandra didn't know that. Daniel had made sure of that. I'll call Daniel, I said, reaching for my phone. You do that. Sandra's smile was indulgent, like a parent humoring a child's tantrum. But he's 9 hours ahead, sweetheart. And he's got a lot on his plate right now. Big project, lots of pressure. I'm sure he trusts me to handle things here. The truth hit me like ice water. Daniel knew. He had to know. His mother didn't make moves like this without his blessing, no matter how much he pretended to stand up to her. And his silence, his refusal to call me back over the past week, suddenly made perfect sense. I looked around the kitchen, at the coffee maker I'd bought, the herb garden I'd planted by the window, the family photos where I was notably absent from most of the Whitmore gatherings. How had I not seen it before? I was a guest in their life, not a member of their family. When? I asked quietly. I'd prefer by the end of the week. But I understand you'll need time to pack. Sandra's voice was almost kind now, which made everything worse. I've arranged for movers to come Friday morning. Professional, discreet. No need for drama. As she turned to leave, her heels clicking that familiar rhythm, she paused at the doorway. Ava? For what it's worth, I hope you find someone who appreciates you. Someone in your own league. And then she was gone, leaving me alone in a kitchen that suddenly felt like it belonged to strangers, surrounded by the broken pieces of my coffee mug and my carefully constructed life. I sat there for a long time, staring at the deed with Daniel's name and Daniel's name alone, listening to Max whimpering at the back door, probably wondering why his world felt different too. The morning sun streamed through the windows I'd hung curtains on, illuminated the life I'd built from nothing, the life that apparently had never really been mine at all. The worst part wasn't being kicked out. The worst part was realizing that somewhere deep down, I'd been expecting it all along. 3 days later, I sat in my new apartment, a cramped one-bedroom above Mrs. Chen's bakery on Maple Street, surrounded by boxes and the bitter taste of betrayal. The walls were thin enough that I could hear every conversation from the street below, every ding of the cash register downstairs, every reminder that my life had been reduced to this, a temporary space that smelled like someone else's dreams. But as I unpacked my things, something strange happened. Instead of finding more heartbreak in each item, I found evidence of something Sandra Whitmore had no idea existed. Something that would change everything. My laptop bag contained more than just personal files. Buried in folders labeled miscellaneous and projects was 2 years' worth of work that had nothing to do with being Daniel's accommodating girlfriend and everything to do with being the secret architect behind Whitmore and Sage's miraculous turnaround. It started simply enough. I'd been working as a freelance graphic designer when Daniel and I met, taking on small projects for local businesses while building my portfolio. Nothing glamorous, restaurant menus, real estate flyers, the occasional logo design. But I was good at it, and more importantly, I understood something most designers didn't: how to make ordinary products feel extraordinary. 2 years ago, Daniel had come home from work looking like he'd aged a decade in a single day. Whitmore and Sage, the home goods company his grandfather had founded in the 1960s, was hemorrhaging money. Sales were down 60% from the previous year. Their biggest retailer had dropped them. Sandra was talking about selling the company or shutting it down entirely. We're too old-fashioned, Daniel had said, slumping onto our couch with a beer and a stack of financial reports. Nobody wants doilies and china patterns anymore. Everything's modern now, minimalist. We're dinosaurs. I'd looked at the catalog he'd tossed on the coffee table, page after page of outdated designs that looked like they belonged in my grandmother's house, and seen something different. Not dinosaurs, but sleeping giants. Classic American craftsmanship wrapped in packaging that screamed 1985. What if you weren't old-fashioned? I'd asked. What if you were timeless? That question led to late nights at the kitchen table, sketching new packaging designs while Daniel worked on his laptop beside me. It led to me researching competitors, analyzing market trends, identifying the gap between what Whitmore and Sage was offering and what modern consumers actually wanted. The breakthrough came when I suggested they pivot their entire brand story. Instead of fighting against the modern minimalist trend, what if they embraced it? What if Whitmore and Sage became the company that proved American craftsmanship could be both heritage and contemporary? I redesigned everything. The logo went from ornate script to clean, modern typography that still honored the company's history. The packaging shifted from busy floral patterns to elegant, minimalist designs that let the quality of the products speak for themselves. I developed an entirely new color palette, warm whites, soft grays, and accent colors that changed seasonally. But the real magic happened when I started working directly with suppliers. Daniel gave me access to the vendor relationships, and I discovered that most of their manufacturers were capable of producing much more sophisticated designs than what Whitmore and Sage had been ordering. They'd been stuck in the same patterns for decades simply because nobody had asked for anything different. I spent months on the phone with pottery studios in North Carolina, textile mills in Georgia, and glassmakers in West Virginia. I learned about production minimums and quality standards and shipping logistics. I negotiated better prices by consolidating orders and committing to longer-term contracts. The Whitmore Modern line launched 8 months later, and it was everything I'd envisioned. Clean lines, beautiful materials, timeless designs that worked in both farmhouse kitchens and city apartments. The first collection sold out in 6 weeks. Daniel was ecstatic, but also nervous. "My mother's going to want to know who did all this work," he'd said, reviewing the sales reports that showed their first profitable quarter in 3 years. "So tell her," I'd said. "Ava, you don't understand. She has very specific ideas about who should be involved in family business decisions. If she knew I'd brought in an outsider." "I'm not an outsider. I'm your fiancé." "You know what I mean." His voice had been gentle but firm. "Let me handle the business side. You focus on the creative work. It's better this way." Better for whom? I'd wondered, but I'd agreed. I loved the work, and Daniel seemed so grateful, so proud of what we'd accomplished together. When the second collection performed even better than the first, when major retailers started calling, when interior design blogs began featuring Whitmore and Sage products, I felt like we were building something real together. I should have asked for credit. I should have insisted on recognition. But instead, I'd asked for something I thought was more valuable: equity in the company I was helping to rebuild. 20%, I'd said one evening, after we'd just secured a contract with a major home goods chain. "I want to be an actual partner in this, Daniel. Not just the invisible hand behind the curtain." He'd agreed immediately, which should have been my first warning sign. "Of course," he'd said. "You've earned it. Let me talk to the lawyers, get the paperwork filed." 6 months later, when I'd asked about the equity documents, he'd assured me everything was handled. "Legal stuff takes time," he'd said, "but it's all taken care of." Now, sitting in my tiny apartment with financial records spread across my coffee table, I realized just how naive I'd been. The success of Whitmore and Sage wasn't some miraculous recovery. It was my work, my vision, my countless hours of research and relationship building and creative problem solving. And Sandra Whitmore, the woman who'd just kicked me out like unwanted furniture, had no idea that the business she was so concerned about protecting was thriving because of the woman she dismissed as dead weight. As I opened my laptop and began organizing files, email chains with suppliers, design sketches with timestamps, profit reports showing the direct correlation between my involvement and the company's recovery, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Sandra had placed that deed on my kitchen counter. Power. For the first time in days, I smiled. 2 months of silence. 2 months of Daniel ignoring my calls, of Sandra pretending I'd never existed, of me rebuilding my life one freelance project at a time while trying not to think about the empire I'd helped create. 2 months of telling myself that maybe it was better this way, that maybe I was meant for something different, something that was actually mine. Then the letter arrived. Mrs. Chen knocked on my door that Tuesday morning, holding a certified mail envelope with the kind of official return address that makes your stomach drop. "For you, dear," she said in her gentle voice, her eyes full of the concern that had become familiar over the past 8 weeks. "Looks important." The letterhead read Morrison, Keller and Associates, attorneys at law. My hands shook as I tore open the envelope, expecting maybe something about the house, some final paperwork to officially erase me from Daniel's life. Instead, I found something so outrageous, so breathtakingly audacious, that I had to read it 3 times before the words sank in. "Dear Ms. Rodriguez, we represent Sandra Whitmore and Sage Home Goods in a matter concerning the theft of proprietary designs and trade secrets. It has come to our client's attention that you have unlawfully obtained confidential business information, including but not limited to product designs, supplier contacts, and strategic business plans." I sank onto my couch, the letter trembling in my hands. Theft. They were accusing me of theft. Our client demands the immediate return of all materials, including digital files, sketches, correspondence, and any other proprietary information. Failure to comply within 10 business days will result in legal action, including potential criminal charges for corporate espionage and intellectual property theft. Corporate espionage. Criminal charges. For designs I'd created with my own hands, strategies I'd developed with my own mind, relationships I'd built with my own time and effort. The letter was signed by someone named Marcus Keller, but I could practically hear Sandra's voice in every calculated word. The same woman who dismissed me as dead weight was now claiming I was somehow valuable enough to steal from her. My phone buzzed. A text message from Daniel. "Ava, please just give back whatever business stuff you have. Let's not make this complicated." Complicated. As if 2 years of my life, 2 years of unpaid work that had saved his family's company, could be reduced to business stuff that I should quietly hand over like a borrowed sweater. I threw my phone across the room, watching it bounce off the wall and clatter to the floor. The sound was satisfying in a way that scared me. For 10 minutes, I sat in stunned silence, reading and rereading the letter. Then something shifted inside me, like a switch being flipped. The shock began to burn away, replaced by something hotter, more focused. They wanted to play games? Fine. But they'd picked the wrong woman to gaslight. I retrieved my phone, thankfully unbroken, and called in sick to the marketing agency where I'd been doing contract work. Then I spread every file, every document, every piece of evidence across my small dining table like a detective building a case. Email after email told the story they were trying to rewrite. There was my initial message to Daniel. What if you reposition the brand as heritage modern instead of fighting against contemporary trends? Timestamp, September 15th, 2022. There were my sketches for the new logo, photographed and sent to Daniel's phone. The metadata showed they were created in my apartment, on my computer, months before the official redesign process had begun. I found contracts with suppliers, negotiations I'd handled directly, agreements signed with my name on them, invoices that had been paid from the business account Daniel had given me access to. My fingerprints were on every successful decision the company had made in the past 2 years. But the real treasure was in my cloud storage. Every design iteration, every market research document, every strategic plan I developed was automatically backed up with timestamps that couldn't be faked. The Whitmore Modern collection that had saved the company existed in my files months before it had appeared in any official company documents. I opened my laptop and pulled up the supplier database I'd built from scratch. Over 200 contacts, organized by product category, with notes about pricing, quality standards, and minimum orders. Sandra thought I'd stolen this information? I'd created it, one phone call at a time. The most damning evidence was a series of emails between Daniel and me from 6 months ago, when we'd been planning the spring collection that was now their biggest seller. Daniel. Mom's asking a lot of questions about where all these new ideas are coming from. Me. So tell her, I'm tired of being invisible. Daniel, let's wait until the equity paperwork goes through. Then it'll be easier to explain. Me, when exactly is that happening? You've been saying soon for months. Daniel, I promise it's handled. Trust me. Trust me. The phrase that had become the soundtrack to my own erasure. I pulled up my business banking app and scrolled through transactions. There it was, a payment from Whitmore and Sage for consulting services from 8 months ago, when Daniel had briefly tried to make our arrangement official before Sandra had shut it down. Legal proof that I'd been a paid consultant, not some girlfriend playing with company secrets. As I organized the evidence, my phone rang. Sandra's number appeared on the screen, and for a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail. But then I thought about that letter, about the word theft, about criminal charges for work that was mine. I answered. Ava, dear. Sandra's voice was honey over steel. I assume you received our letter? I did. My voice was steadier than I felt. Good. I hoped we could resolve this quietly, like civilized adults. Return what doesn't belong to you, and we can all move on with our lives. I looked at the evidence spread across my table. 2 years of my creativity, my strategy, my vision that had transformed their failing business into something worth protecting. You're right, Sandra, I said quietly. We should resolve this like civilized adults, through lawyers. The silence on the other end was long enough that I wondered if she'd hung up. Excuse me? I'll be in touch, I said, and ended the call. For the first time since Daniel had left for Dubai, I felt like myself again. Not the accommodating girlfriend, not the invisible consultant, but Ava Rodriguez, the woman who'd saved Whitmore and Sage. Now it was time to save herself. I spent that entire night organizing my evidence like a general preparing for fight. Every email printed and chronologically ordered. Every design file backed up in triplicate. Every supplier contact verified and documented. By dawn, I had built an arsenal that would make any corporate lawyer weep with joy. But I needed more than evidence. I needed someone who could wield it properly. At 9 a.m. sharp, I walked into the offices of Chun and Associates, no relation to my landlord, just a happy coincidence I discovered during 3 hours of online research. Jennifer Chun, ESQ, specialized in intellectual property and business disputes, with a track record of taking on established companies and winning. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe early 30s, with sharp eyes behind stylish glasses and an office that screamed competent professionalism. When I explained my situation, she listened without interruption, occasionally making notes on a legal pad. Do you have documentation? She asked when I finished. I opened my laptop bag and began placing folders on her desk. Email chains spanning 2 years. Design files with metadata. Supplier contracts with my signature. Bank records showing payments from the company to my business account. Jennifer's eyebrows rose as she flipped through the documents. This is comprehensive. I'm thorough, I said. What about equity? You mentioned Daniel promised you ownership stake. My heart sank. He said he filed the paperwork, but I never saw any official documents. I was naive. I trusted him. Jennifer nodded, making another note. We'll need to verify that. Corporate filings are public record. She turned to her computer and began typing. Whitmore and Sage Home Goods, incorporated in Delaware. Let me pull up their current ownership structure. I held my breath as she scrolled through what looked like legal gibberish on her screen. Then she stopped, and a slow smile spread across her face. Ava Rodriguez, 20% equity, filed March 15th of last year. The words hit me like lightning. What? She turned her monitor toward me, pointing at a line in the corporate filing. Right there. Daniel actually did file the paperwork. You own 20% of Whitmore and Sage. I stared at the screen, my name printed in black and white next to a percentage that suddenly made everything different. But Sandra acts like I have no claim to the company. Maybe she doesn't know, Jennifer said. Or maybe she's hoping you don't know. Either way, this changes everything. You're not just someone with evidence of contribution. You're a legal owner being accused of stealing from your own company. The irony was so perfect it was almost funny. Almost. What are my options? I asked. Jennifer leaned back in her chair, her expression shifting into what I recognized as strategic thinking mode. We go nuclear. Cease and desist letter pointing out that they're threatening legal action against a 20% owner for accessing her own company's materials. Demand for immediate cessation of their harassment. And she paused, her smile turning predatory. Back pay. Back pay. You've been working as an unpaid consultant for 2 years, providing services that saved their company. As a partial owner, you should have been receiving compensation commensurate with your contribution. We can calculate damages based on the company's improved performance directly attributable to your work. I felt something shift inside me, like tectonic plates rearranging themselves. This wasn't just about defending myself anymore. This was about claiming what was rightfully mine. How much are we talking about? Jennifer pulled out a calculator and began working through numbers based on the financial reports I'd brought. Conservative estimate? $200,000 in back consulting fees, plus your share of profits from the collections you designed. We're looking at potentially $500,000. $500,000. Money that represented 2 years of late nights, creative breakthroughs, supplier negotiations, and strategic planning. Money that Sandra had wanted to disappear along with me. Do it, I said. Jennifer spent the next 2 hours crafting what she called the most satisfying cease and desist letter I've ever written. She read key passages aloud as she worked. Our client, Ms. Ava Rodriguez, is a 20% equity holder in Whitmore and Sage Home Goods, as documented in corporate filings dated March 15, 2023. Your accusations of theft regarding materials our client created as part of her ownership role are not only baseless, but constitute harassment of a legitimate business owner. Furthermore, Ms. Rodriguez has provided uncompensated consulting services valued at approximately $200,000, plus her proportional share of profits from products she designed and strategies she implemented. Your client's failure to provide adequate compensation for these services constitutes a breach of fiduciary duty. The letter demanded immediate cessation of all legal threats, formal acknowledgement of my ownership position, and payment of back compensation within 30 days. The beauty of this, Jennifer explained, is that they probably expected you to quietly disappear. They're betting on you being too intimidated or too broke to fight back. This letter tells them they miscalculated badly. As she printed copies on official letterhead, my phone buzzed with another text from Daniel. Mom says you're being unreasonable. Just give back the files, and we can work something out. I showed the message to Jennifer, who laughed. Work something out? Honey, we're about to work everything out. She handed me the letter, and I read it through one more time. Every word was a weapon, every paragraph a declaration of fight. But more than that, it was a reclamation. For 2 years, I'd been the invisible force behind Whitmore and Sage's success. Now I was stepping out of the shadows, not as Daniel's girlfriend or Sandra's problem, but as Ava Rodriguez, businesswoman and rightful owner.
Send it, I said.
As Jennifer's assistant prepared the certified mail, I felt the last pieces of my old, accommodating self fall away. Sandra Whitmore had wanted to erase me from her family's story. Instead, she'd awakened something much more dangerous, a woman who finally understood her own worth. The letter would arrive at their offices by tomorrow afternoon. I could hardly wait to see Sandra's face when she realized that the woman she dismissed as dead weight was about to become her business partner whether she liked it or not.
Game on.
The call came 3 days after our cease, and desist letter arrived at Whitmore and Sage. Sandra's voice was ice-cold professional when she left the voicemail. There'll be an emergency board meeting Thursday at 2 p.m. to address your claims. Your presence is not required. Not required. The dismissive tone told me everything I needed to know about Sandra's strategy. She was planning to rally the board against me, probably painting me as a vengeful ex-girlfriend trying to extort money from the grieving family business. What she didn't realize was that by calling an official board meeting, she'd just handed me the perfect stage for my debut performance. Not required, but legally entitled, Jennifer had said with a grin when I played her the message. As a 20% owner, you have every right to attend any board meeting. In fact, they're legally obligated to notify you of all meetings. Thursday arrived with the kind of crisp October weather that makes everything feel possible. I chose my outfit carefully. A navy blazer I'd bought for client presentations, tailored pants, and the pearl earrings my grandmother had given me for luck. Professional, confident, but not trying too hard. I wanted to look like exactly what I was. A businesswoman who belonged in that room. Jennifer met me in the parking lot of the Whitmore and Sage headquarters, a converted Victorian mansion that Sandra had decorated to look like something from Southern Living magazine. She carried a leather briefcase that practically radiated legal authority. "Remember," she said as we walked up the front steps, "let the facts do the talking. Stay calm, stay professional. You've already won. We're just making it official." The boardroom was exactly what I'd expected. Dark wood paneling, oil paintings of stern-looking men who were probably Whitmore ancestors, and a massive mahogany table that could seat 20, but today held only 6 people. Sandra sat at the head of the table like a queen holding court, flanked by what I assumed were the other board members. Conversations stopped when Jennifer and I entered. Sandra's face went through several expressions: surprise, annoyance, and finally, resignation. "Ava," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "How unexpected." "Actually, it's legally required," Jennifer said pleasantly, pulling out a chair for me. "Ms. Rodriguez has the right to attend all board meetings as a 20% equity holder." I watched the faces around the table as Jennifer's words sink in. There was an elderly man in a bow tie who looked confused, a middle-aged woman who seemed intrigued, and a younger man in an expensive suit who was definitely doing mental calculations. None of them had ever seen me before, which meant Sandra had kept my existence and my contributions completely secret. "Perhaps we should start with introductions," I said, settling into my chair with a kind of calm confidence I'd never known I possessed. "I'm Ava Rodriguez, partial owner and creative director of the Whitmore Modern Collection." The bow-tie man, who introduced himself as Harold Whitmore, Daniel's great-uncle, leaned forward with interest. "The Modern Collection? That's been our most successful line in decades." "Yes," I said, opening my laptop. "I'm glad you mentioned that because I brought some numbers I thought the board might find interesting." Sandra's jaw tightened. "I don't think that's necessary." "Actually it is," said the woman, who'd introduced herself as Patricia Mills, an independent board member. "If Ms. Rodriguez is claiming credit for our recent success, I'd like to see the evidence." I connected my laptop to the room's projection system, a skill I'd learned during my freelancing days. The first slide appeared on the wall, a graph showing Whitmore and Sage's revenue from 2019 to present. The line was practically flat until late 2022, then shot upward like a rocket. As you can see, I began. The company's fortunes changed dramatically beginning in September 2022. That's when I started working with Daniel to rebrand and reposition Whitmore and Sage for the contemporary market. I clicked to the next slide, before and after images of the company's packaging. The old designs looked tired and dated next to the clean, modern aesthetic I'd created. The visual rebrand was just the beginning. I continued, advancing through slides that showed the new product lines, updated supplier relationships, and marketing strategies. I spent 18 months rebuilding relationships with manufacturers, negotiating better pricing, and developing products that honored the company's heritage while appealing to modern consumers. Harold was nodding enthusiastically. "That explains so much. We went from bleeding money to our best year ever, but Sandra always said it was just market timing." I glanced at Sandra, who was sitting rigidly in her chair, her face a mask of controlled fury. "Market timing certainly helped," I said diplomatically, "but the transformation required significant strategic work." The young man in the expensive suit, Thomas Chun, the company's financial advisor, raised his hand. "Do you have documentation of your specific contributions?" This was the moment I'd been preparing for. I nodded to Jennifer, who began distributing copies of my evidence portfolio. Email chains, design files, supplier contracts, everything organized and indexed like a legal briefing. "You'll find comprehensive documentation of Ms. Rodriguez's work," Jennifer said, "including contracts she negotiated, designs she created, and strategic plans she developed. All time-stamped and verified." I watched the board members flip through the documents, their expressions changing from skeptical to surprised to impressed. Patricia Mills looked up from a supplier contract I negotiated that had saved the company 30% on ceramic manufacturing. "This is extensive," she said. 2 years of extensive, I agreed. "And according to corporate filings, I've been a 20% owner since March of last year. Yet I've never received compensation for my consulting work or my share of the profits from the collections I designed." Sandra finally found her voice. "This is a family business," she said, her tone sharp. "We don't just hand out ownership to outsiders." "Legally, she's not an outsider," Jennifer said calmly. "She's a partner. And partners are entitled to compensation and recognition for their contributions." Thomas was studying the financial projections I'd created for the spring line. "These revenue forecasts, they're almost exactly what we ended up hitting." "How did you?" "Market research, consumer testing, and careful analysis of buying trends," I said. "The same methodology I'd use for any client, except this client happened to be partially mine." Harold chuckled, actually chuckled. "Sandra, you've been keeping quite a secret from us. This young lady appears to be the reason we're all still in business." The room fell silent except for the rustling of papers as the board members continued reviewing my documentation. I could see Sandra's carefully constructed narrative crumbling in real time. She'd wanted to paint me as a threat to the family business, but instead, the board was discovering I was the person who'd saved it. Patricia Mills closed her folder and looked directly at me. "Ms. Rodriguez, what exactly are you looking for from this board?" I took a breath, feeling the weight of 2 years of invisible work settling into this single moment. "Recognition," I said simply. "I want my contributions acknowledged, my ownership position formalized, and fair compensation for the work I've done. I built this success alongside Daniel, and I deserve to be treated as the business partner I legally am." Around the table, heads were nodding. Even Sandra could see which way the wind was blowing. The woman who dismissed me as dead weight was about to discover that I was very much alive and holding 20% of her empire. 6 months later, I sat in what used to be Daniel's office, reviewing sketches for the holiday collection while autumn light streamed through windows I'd chosen new curtains for. The nameplate on my desk read, "Ava Rodriguez, Creative Director," in the same elegant font I designed for the company logo. Some victories are quiet, but they're no less sweet for their subtlety. The board vote had been unanimous. Patricia Mills had called it long overdue recognition for exceptional contributions. Harold Whitmore had insisted on a formal announcement in the company newsletter. Even Thomas Chun had seemed genuinely excited about having someone with my track record officially on the leadership team. Sandra had said nothing during the vote, her face a mask of professional composure. But I'd caught her eye as we left the boardroom, and in that moment, I saw something I'd never expected: grudging respect. She might never like me, might never welcome me into the Whitmore family with open arms, but she could no longer pretend I didn't belong in the business. The changes had been swift once my position was formalized. Back pay totaling $247,000 deposited into my account within 2 weeks. My own office, my own team, my own business cards. Most importantly, my name on everything I'd created, from the Whitmore Modern Collection to the supplier relationships that had saved the company. I had moved back into the house on Maple Ridge. That chapter of my life felt like it belonged to a different person, someone who'd been content to live in shadows and accept crumbs. Instead, I'd bought my own place, a converted loft downtown with exposed brick walls and enough space for a proper design studio. It was mine, completely and unquestionably mine. The knock on my office door interrupted my thoughts. "Come in," I called, expecting Jennifer with updates on our latest contract negotiations. Instead, Daniel walked in, looking like he'd aged 5 years during his time in Dubai. His hair was longer, his face tanned but tired, and he carried himself with the uncertainty of someone who no longer knew where he stood. "Hi, Ava," he said, hovering near the doorway like he wasn't sure he was welcome in what had once been his own office. "Daniel." I set down my pen and studied the man I'd once planned to marry. "How was Dubai?" "Successful. The project finished ahead of schedule." He shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable. I got back last week. Been trying to work up the courage to come see you. I gestured to the chair across from my desk. Sit. He sat, his eyes taking in the changes to the space. My design boards on the walls, my books on the shelves, my coffee mug on the desk. Mom told me what happened. About the board meeting, about your position here. My position, I repeated. You mean the 20% ownership stake you filed a year ago and never bothered to tell me about? Daniel winced. I was going to tell you. I needed to find the right time, when Mom was more receptive to the idea. When would that have been, Daniel? When I was 30? 40? After she'd successfully erased me from your life entirely? He was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. I messed up. I know that. I let her convince me that keeping the peace was more important than standing up for you. For us. I thought I was protecting you from her disapproval, but I was really just protecting myself from having to choose sides. It was the most honest thing he'd said to me in years, and it hurt more than his silence had. You did choose sides, I said quietly. You chose hers every time it mattered. When she moved into our house. When she kicked me out. When she threatened to have me arrested for stealing my own work. I know. His voice was barely above a whisper. I know. And I hate myself for it. I came back thinking maybe there was a way to fix this. I looked at this man who'd once been my everything, who'd shared my bed and my dreams and my quiet ambitions. He looked smaller now, diminished by his own choices. There's nothing to fix, Daniel, I said. What we had is over. But if you want to earn back my trust, my friendship, my respect as a business partner, that's going to take time. And work. Real work, not just apologies. He nodded, hope and resignation warring in his expression. I understand. I'll do whatever it takes. Start by treating Sandra's employees with the same respect you'd want for yourself. Learn the business from the ground up instead of assuming your name gives you authority. And never, ever let anyone dismiss someone's contributions because they're not part of your family. Ava. That's all I have to say right now. I picked up my pen, a clear dismissal. We'll see how you do. After he left, I returned to my sketches, but my mind wandered to Sandra. She'd stopped by earlier in the week, ostensibly to discuss the spring catalog, but really to take the measure of me in my new role. We'd been cordially professional, discussing market trends and production timelines like the business partners we now were. As she'd prepared to leave, she'd paused at one of my design boards, a mood board for next year's Mother's Day collection featuring hand-thrown pottery and locally sourced textiles. This is good work, she'd said quietly, and it was the closest thing to an apology I'd ever get. Thank you, I'd replied and meant it. Now, as I put the finishing touches on sketches that would bear my name and my vision, I thought about legacy. Not the kind built on family names or inherited wealth, but the kind forged from talent, determination, and the courage to claim what you've earned. Sandra Whitmore had tried to erase me from her family story. Instead, she'd helped me write my own. My phone buzzed with a text from my assistant. The Times wants to interview you for their Women in Business feature. They're calling you the design genius behind Whitmore and Sage's remarkable turnaround. I smiled, typing back. Set it up. Ava Rodriguez, creative director. It had a nice ring to it. Better yet, it was true.